Hello everyone and welcome back to Free Kick, the AFLW Fantasy podcast. We are here after the first round of actual games for the AFLW season of 2026. I'm very excited to say I am joined by a couple co-hosts. I have Willow and Liam here with me today. How are we going today, specifically Liam?
I am, you know what, I'm excited. I enjoyed the end of the preseason. I enjoyed a full weekend's worth of AFLW games. However, I'm not exactly particularly excited with how my fantasy season has started.
Interesting. A little teaser for our shipping report coming up. How about you, Willow? How was the first weekend of the season for you?
Oh, I am thrilled that AFLW is back. I am loving how it is going. Didn't love how my Cats were absolutely demolished by North Melbourne after quarter time, but I'm not too unhappy with my fantasy score.
There was a second there in, early in the second quarter, it was like Geelong in front.
Yeah.
And I was in there live, and I think the crowd kind of collectively went, this is not going as expected. And then North Melbourne also heard it and went, nah, stuff that. Sorry, guys. Sorry we ever thought you had sorry to give you the illusion of a chance. Go back home.
They decided, let's shake off the rust and just absolutely blitz it. And from that point on, it was, I'm going to be honest, it was pretty ugly. And that's okay. North Melbourne are pretty bloody good. And to go with North Melbourne for a quarter, you know what? Sometimes you got to take that.
I mean, any game where, you at least have a challenge of North Melbourne in the first half, I think is a success. But geez, that monster team is rolling on into 2026. It'll be interesting to see how they finish the season, if they can keep undefeated yet again. But we are not here to talk AFLW right now. We are here to talk our AFLW fantasy scores, and we have just finished up with the first weekend. We have our first shipping report to deliver. So we are going to go this week. Bottom up, I think, is going to be the vibe. And first cab off the rank is unfortunately not here to deliver herself. Bow is down to me. Mel's side finished with a 1,766, which has left her with a weekly ranking, an overall ranking of 3,049. I think that's a solid start because realistically, a lot of these ranks are incredibly tight and bunched together. So even jumping up to our next coach, specifically Liam, who is a solid, 1,000 ranks ahead. Liam, can you tell us a little bit about your team this round?
Yeah, for all of 1,000 ranks, I am 22 points in front. So I'm at 1,788. It really does speak to how tightly packed the rankings are.
No doubt at all. How about how'd your team go? What were your good calls, your bad calls?
Yeah, okay, yeah, right. I thought we might be doing just a whip around of the headlines, but yeah, good call, Ash or Woodland. I had and ahed for a very long time about what my kind of M4, M5 structure would look like, and I'm pretty comfortable that I nailed my M4. Scored 100, still believe she's owed at least 3 more tackles. Yes, I'm one of those people who will watch just intently. She was, a very unique player to have. Quite unique player to have in the midfield. So very, very happy with how that went. My bad call, ultimately it comes down to having picked Ash Richards when I ultimately would have preferred Havana Harris. But then I overcorrected with the news of both Courtney Hodder and Ali Anderson out. And I've started in my side Charlie Mullins and then most disappointingly Isabel Dawes, with only a 68. Very frustrating game to watch. Looked like she was going to be hit up in the corridor multiple times for a mark. Kick gets shorted or gets blown away. So a 68 when a lot of other people, I could have capitalised given that a lot of people had gone with Anne Hatchard who only scored a 72. And ultimately I've just kind of fallen into that same quagmire. And so that was very, very disappointing. In terms of my blind side, I think it will come as no surprise to long-term listeners that it is just GWS, full stop. Everything about it. Day 1, when I did not expect them to whatsoever. It was also the things that they did involved in that win. First of all, dropping Emily Peace after Jono, you and I watched Cambridge McCormick last year struggle to get hit for a pass or a kick in from Peace, and all of a sudden, dropped out of nowhere after Peace took all the kick-ins in the practice match. They moved TLR from the half-forward line, where they did not play well in the practice match, to half-back, where they have been an All-Australian, and lo and behold, they looked great. They managed to find probably one of 2 or 3 players capable of tagging Ella Roberts, and as it turns out, it was Grace Koch, who hadn't really shown much as a footballer last season, but as an athlete, she looked like she might have something there. Turned her into an elite tagger. Everything about that win was like, in the space of 3 weeks between the pracky and now, GWS just went, well, we'll do the winning things now. Like, we'll do all of the really smart, basic choices and just we'll win. And so I was gobsmacked. That's it. I had nothing else.
Yeah. I mean, that was probably the most surprising result of the weekend, and one that, I think we're all expecting West Coast to be, just rolling across, from last season, rolling into new wins this year. And geez, the Giants just absolutely shocked them.
And it really was extra painful when Ella Roberts, who will be a topic of conversation throughout this entire episode, was one of my worst performers. I didn't really want to dunk on it. It was an extremely hard tag, but a 53 hurt.
No, we're absolutely going to need to talk about whether or not more of those are coming this season. But before we do that, we're going to jump across to our next coach on the podcast, Willow. How did you go this weekend?
Yes, I finished a massive 500 ranks ahead of Liam, far outstripped Liam by 15 points. So as you said, Jono, it is very, very close to the top. Weekly rank of 1,509, so pretty happy with my 1803. My good call was Becky Webster. I was so happy with this, the primary distributor from Geelong. Jono basically asked me, why is this any different? Because it's the exact same thing that Becky Webster was doing last year. And I said, I don't know, and I don't really care. I'm just really happy with it. 2% ownership and a 93. I was very, very happy with that. My bad call was basically just not backing my preseason feelings. And but in the week after the preseason games, I traded out a lot of the players that I was pretty keen on in the preseason, including Claudia Whitford, Keely Skepper, Violet Patterson, and Yasmin Janchenk, all of whom did much better than the players that I traded in. So very disappointing there, and I think my trades this week will probably be something of a correction. My blind side, I also agreed with Liam. The Grace Koch tag was something I did not see coming at all, and it completely ruined the Ella Roberts pick for a lot of coaches out there. But just to vary it up a little bit, for me, the blind side was the rookie roulette. A lot of the rookies that did really, really well in the preseason didn't quite live up to what they were doing in that preseason game. I think a lot of people probably got caught out by some low-scoring rookies who aren't going to generate a lot of money. And I think if you did stick with some of the ones who didn't go so well in the preseason, you'd probably be pretty happy right now.
No, absolutely. I think some of those rookie scores were the complete opposite of what we saw in the practice games. Take the Gold Coast. If you just take, Quigley and Usher's scores and you reverse them, that's basically what happened in round one, which is kind of crazy to say. But a very good round there. But of course, we saved the best to last. I'm coming in this round at top coach on the podcast. In Rod We Trust finished with 1,873, keeping me just outside of the top 100. I'm on 111th spot right now. So very glad for those 70 points making the difference there. I think really the benefit I had, which propped me up there, was probably starting with an expensive M8. So Ailey Runnels was my M8, and I didn't have a midfield score under 88, I think. I think Elise Parker was my lowest. So I think that structure probably saved me from some of the poor rookie scores. But let me tell you, my bench is just littered with terrible scores. So that's absolutely going to be a fix-up for me. And one particularly bad call which frustrated me. On the live on the air last week, I was saying I need to get rid of Ella Slocum and bring in Amelia Yassir. But I did not do so live. I forgot to do it until the next day, and I think there was a 30 6-point difference between them, which could have pumped me up even further. So I think that was probably my bad call of the weekend. My blind side, aside from the rookies as well, which were very shocking, probably the amount of high-scoring defenders. I think there were so many defenders that have started their season with an 80-plus score. And I do wonder if it's potentially a trend that I'm going to be, looking for over the next round, just to see if that is maybe a different play style that we're seeing, if the ball's just yo-yoing faster between and defenders are going to be picking up. It's just something I'm going to start looking at because I think there's a couple players in my side that I'm not so confident are going to get involved in that, and maybe that's something that I need to do. But look, next segment we've got here is, well, actually, sorry, before we jump to that, we've got one free kick team, which we have all collectively worked together on last week on the episode, and we have a team name. And I might let the podcast host who actually did have the winning name announce it. Willow, what's the name of the team this year?
Yes, the name of the team this year is Results May Vary, and that is exactly what we saw for this team. Ended up with a score of 1775, which is pretty solid to be fair. A weekly/overall rank of 2,621. In terms of how this team worked out, I'm actually pretty happy with the vetoing of Schultz for Lucy Wales, forcing Mel to pick a different R1. That worked out quite well, and those two do play each other this week, so that's going to be a very interesting clash. The bad call, I'm hesitant to say anything that we did in terms of our actual picks was a bad call. One of them that I think we can probably all agree on, because we all agreed on it before we started, was putting Quigley as one of our locked-in players, because we're all very confident on that one, so that was a bit of an oof. And the blind side was Sarah Verrier not scoring 150 plus. Absolutely wild. The results indeed did vary.
And a prime target to trade out this week, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Which is
not someone I'm picking for the rest of the season.
Which I'm going to be honest is very, very disappointing, but also very, very understandable.
All right, let's move across to the watch and wait scoreboard. And Liam, as our lower scoring pod host that is here right now, would you like to do the honors?
This feels outrageous. Mel not being here after she just wanted to give it to whoever she wanted, and then all of a sudden it would have been her week and not here to do it. It's the easiest week to do it, though, because there's not a separate top week score or top coach. That is the same person. That is Tim G and his team, Yellow and Black, except the E in Yellow is a 3. Not sure how you want me to pronounce that live and in person. Yathrello and Back, who scored 1971. In terms of top 100, we've got a coach here whose name is, very helpfully, Team Name. Thank you, Lucas R. Again, with a great one to read out live and in person, who scored an 1875. And then an update on the free kick leave. We've got the third overall coach, James, and the Halo Effect. And we've got 21 of the top 100 are in the free kick listener league.
Yeah, no, lovely. I have to say, I had to check that team name a couple times, because every time I saw it, I went, "That can't be right. We've just left a typo there on the run sheet." But look, strong starts there from a few people. It's going to be interesting to see how quickly we can chase them in, given everyone is quite condensed still in the top of the rankings. Let's jump into tonight's hot topics, though, because we've got a few. The first one, though, is we've talked a little bit about these rookies and some of the disappointing scores we saw over the weekend. Let's run through which ones are really causing us a little bit of grief, which ones we think we need to be targeting, and those which are sort of borderline, we're not really sure what to do with. So let's start with our targets in defense. So Violet Patterson, top scoring rookie of the round, put up the 100 and went up 165k. Absolutely extraordinary. I don't think we saw this coming after the practice game, even though they scored decently. I think it was, a 65 or something in the practice games.
Might have been low 70s.
Something around there.
I think it was a 68 from memory.
Yeah. Is Violet Patterson the target, I suppose, this week? That's the big question.
I think that if you can find a way to get the cash to do it, absolutely. Because at the moment, if she scores a 50, she will go up another 104k. She averages 50 for the next 3 weeks. She'll go up a total of 180k.
Yeah, it's not bad.
And that's setting aside like what do we think she will actually score? Like, is she going to be a 50 or 60 or 70 averaging player? At the moment, based on the practice match, and this game, she's an 80 and therefore a top 6. I think if you can afford to do it, if you have a way you can generate a lot of cash, you can go down from a 400k to a 200-ish k rookie. You can find someone to. I'm happy for that to be the case. The next question though is like, what do we think she's going to average? Right? She scored 100. The ball lived down in Collingwood's defence. Richmond are possibly one of the best matchups for defenders. Is it sustainable given that Butler, Geordie Allen, and a couple of other defenders, Kalinda Howarth, and then I expect Maisie Nankervel as well to be coming in when she's healthy. It's a lot of defenders. Does that change what we think she'll average?
I mean, I think we're all probably not expecting her to average 100 regardless, right? That's, I think, a given. But I think that the way Collingwood are playing at the moment, they will probably back in the youth. I think that Patterson's a player that probably will stay in that back line. Whether they average that well, I think is a whole different question, as you're saying. I think that an average of 50 from here is probably what you'd be able to expect. And even if that does suddenly drop away when those other players do come back, they're all expected back in a fortnight. That might be enough for us to make that 180k that you're saying, Liam.
I think if we can just do it for 180k, I think it's worthwhile. Whether or not that makes her a must-have does come down to how much do you need the points on field. Because I think the question for me is, I've got Chantal Edmondson sitting there, who is now going to be basically the same price as Violet Patterson. If they're going to average the same number of points, I may as well just sideways so that I can get that extra 180k and Patterson becomes a launching point to a premium defender, or a sideways in 3 weeks to a premium defender. If we think Violet Patterson is going to come back down to earth, noting that she has her highest score in the AFLW or her under 18s was 72 before now, albeit she's had 2 100-plus scores in her draft year in the SANFLW. And in under 18s in AFLW today, she'd never had close to her 23, 24 disposals or whatever she had. If it's going to be sub 50 that she falls back to, particularly when those other options come back, I might just have to chalk that up as a loss, as a disappointment. So it's going to be probably one of my 2 toughest decisions for the week is whether or not Violet Patterson is a must-have.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think I'm currently leaning towards the decision you say, where it's if she's going to score exactly what Emerson is, it's may as well jump on for the cash, but definitely a strong one to consider. There's a few more popular rookies, though, that people started in defense. So we look at some of the higher ownership defensive rookies. You've got a Zoe Wackfer, you've got an Olivia Crane. I think Charlotte Brewer was sort of pushing up towards the end there. All of these players, I think, scored underneath 40, which I would say is generally pretty disappointing. Are these just sort of scores that we're happy to cop as a 1 week, or are these players that we're looking to potentially move on?
I think Wackfer amongst those is the player most likely to move on.
To move on?
Yes. Given she's the closest launching point to get to Patterson, for example, or she's the closest to Ava Usher, who we'll talk about in the midfields in a second. Like, Charlotte Brewer scored more points, but was a much cheaper player to begin with, is my thinking. I actually don't have Wackfer's break even in front of me. Oh, that's her sister. Break even of 25, projected to make 30k, whereas Brewer, who was quiet and didn't have the best game, a break even of 14. She'd make 50 or 60k this week with another 35 to 40.
I feel like it's an interesting one because I feel like Wackfer is one that I guess I wasn't expecting to score well against the Giants because I think the Giants are a team I wasn't expecting to dominate the inside 50 count, and the players that are kicking it inside 50 often are players like Evans or someone who's actually a decent kick. So I don't think the opportunity for intercept marks are there as much as they are in other games against teams that are dominating the midfield battle and just sort of throwing the ball forward. But the fact that they lost and this was a poor score, I don't know. That's probably the disappointing factor for me.
Yeah, I think for me, Wakfa's a player that I'm prepared to give Wakfa probably one more week, in that I think that even unless they score another dreadful score, they'll at least make a little bit of money. And what we saw in the preseason game was pretty captivating, let's be honest, which is why a lot of us ended up picking her. This is partly because I've got other ways that I can get to Patterson. I'll explain it a bit later when we talk about our trade plans, but I've gone for a slightly different route to get Violet Patterson into my team. But yeah, I think to me, Patterson, just for the amount of money that she's going to make, even if she scores like 30 this week, there's still money to be made. I think it should be a priority, but it's not necessarily a must do. Yeah.
Fair enough. I think if you've started with most of the other, there's a whole heap of defensive rookies as well that ended up around the 50 mark. So if you started with an Evie Coucher, I think you're pretty happy. You started with a Kaylee Cronin, you'd be pretty happy with that 52. Weaver Healy, I think you'd also be pretty happy with a 52. So I think really there's a real split between rookies that went boom and those that went bust. So it's certainly an interesting defensive lineup. Moving to the midfield, though, I think this is where a lot of people were probably either thrilled or disappointed with their decisions. The big change was at the Gold Coast, where we were looking at Lily Quigley as the option, who only put up the 10, whilst her teammate Ava Usher, who did very little in the preseason game, went on to put on a 78 and went up 120k in her first weekend. Is Ava Usher an important target this week?
Yes. Absolutely.
Even with just the 1 or 2, what was the 9% CBAs I think she had?
Just the eye test says yes. I think that what we saw was a game in the wet against a team like the Western Bulldogs, who I would say don't play precise space football. They play messy, inconsistent, a bit haphazard, but ultimately defensive and congested football. It's where Ava Usher can thrive. Lily Quigley, on the other hand, is a third, fourth layer outside player who, when in normal, more high intensity football conditions in the wet, doesn't get the ball kicked to her. And when it does, it's like on top of her head, or she really did struggle to find a way to impact on the game. I think that Usher, and the fact that she won 7 frees for, a lot of them for her tackle efforts, it speaks to her more natural game. And it's kind of why I was so hot on her before the practice match. I can't imagine anyone looking worse in a practice game. It was 16 points and truly did not look up to the speed at all. That was so far the opposite when I watched on Saturday night. I think Ava Usher is going to be a 50 or 60 averaging player at this rate, and therefore a must-have.
Yeah, no, I can see that. So potentially, though, with Quigley on the other side, it's a matter of holding, because she just not moved at all with her cash and just waiting for some dry games, because she could get the ball on the outside then, and it's just going to be a slow burn until then.
So they're playing West Coast in West Coast on Saturday, and it is a wet game.
Well,
currently expected to rain.
All right, so it's going to be a really slow hold, is what we're saying. Yeah.
Or a trade, like it's just get off, because. Let's have a look. I hadn't actually got the Quigley.
That's fair. Maybe it's a trade now, or you're committing to the hold. I reckon that's probably the decision here.
Yeah, I think that if you aren't trading this week, you're holding for 4 or 5 weeks. And you do have the advantage now, we have a lot more bench spots. You can afford to hold slower developing rookies, so it's fine. But I ultimately think that if you can trade, you can make your trades work. I would trade out quickly, bring in Usher as a way to make it all happen. And I think that it's worthwhile talking about there were some other very impressive rookies on the weekend too.
Absolutely they were. Because I think the highly owned ones in Sunny Lappin 47 and Chloe... hold on. I'm going to get this one right. Chloe Bown.
Yes.
Yeah, with her 70. Between those two, I think everyone would be content or happy. I don't think you'd be thrilled, but I think you'd be going very, very solid start. But it was really the players that were listed as mids that were not playing in the midfield that were the ones that really popped off this week. So Marlo Graham as a half forward for the Brisbane Lions had a 68. Jordan Allen playing half back for the Melbourne Demons had a 69. And Imogen Brown on the wing had a 70. Kind of impressive scores. Do any of those tempt you as options to bring in for Quigley?
I would say that if you were already an owner of Usher, my pick of the three was Jordan Allen, who I saw the most of and who looked the most comfortable at the level. Her kicking in particular will be a point of preference in the ball movement chains for Melbourne, I suspect. Marlo Graham, I wonder if she scores that much. I wouldn't be picking her against North Melbourne whatsoever. I think that that's a recipe for disaster. But I also wonder if she did get a little bit more time on ground with Courtney Hodder being a very late out, but expected to return. It's another player in that half forward and forward pocket area where I think Marlo Graham gets pushed out. Imogen Brown is one that I must admit I don't have a read on. Kicked a goal very late. Was someone who was delisted after, I think, one season at Sydney. Very, very fast. I just don't know if there's just something about it. Like, it's just a weird route to come to the AFLW. I don't know if I trust it. But I must admit, this is the one game that I watched the least of. And I haven't really, laser focused in on Brown yet. So I might have to, update my take throughout the week.
Yeah, I think Brown was one of the players listed to watch at the Swans this year with the new role. So... Could be one worth putting a little more time into. But just to flip to the other side, I think there's a few sort of more expensive rookies that we might need to get rid of. Willow, what did you make of the games of Kiera Yerbury?
Yeah, it's a tough one. They were sort of stuck playing in a pocket, didn't really look like getting much of the ball where they were, playing a bit off the half-back line. To me, it's probably one I'd be looking to get to Usher as soon as possible if you do have Kiera Yerbury. It's a lot of money to have not making money, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think particularly these rookies that started more expensive, if they're not making moves, they're probably the ones to be moving on. Which, I guess brings us to the ruck line because we had, I suppose, probably the majority of coaches split between two bench rookies here in the Rucks. And neither of them really delivered. So we've seen Georgia Davies put up a 29 for the Gold Coast and Jacinta Hose have just one of the unluckiest games of all time, finished with an 8. Coincidentally, the number of weeks she is now going to be missing for across the rest of the season, which is, absolutely devastating for owners. Liam, what are you doing if you're in this position where you've got Hose?
It is a tough one because I think it's we obviously kind of have to talk about the fact that there was one good rookie priced ruck, and that was Yasmin Janšek. The question then becomes, do you prioritize trading out Hose to bring in Janšek? And do we think that, the 50s and 60s are going to be there for her? So it's a bit difficult to answer in and of itself. I think that for Hose, it's not a priority trade out. Ultimately, I think you can hold as a loop. You will probably be one of the... If you have Jacinta Hose, you will have the advantage now of a captaincy loophole, whereas most other people, well, as of right now, before, we see teams, it might be that a whole bunch of rookies are dropped. You're going to have that advantage over people who don't have one, who are just having to put the C straight on one of their premium midfielders.
Yeah, I think if you've managed to nail the rest of your rookies, I think it's one of those ones where you can be pretty happy. If you've unfortunately got players like Quigley where you don't have a huge amount of cash generation, to have a player like that sitting on your bench is probably not going to help you out that much. So I think, if you're going to have to fix up your rookies, you're going to have to fix up your rookies, I think, from the sounds of it. And Hose is one that might be an easy one because you do have an obvious choice in Janšek. I think, it's a devastating blow, and that red dot is something that we have talked about a lot, about whether it's worth having it that early in the season. If it were me, I probably wouldn't want it necessarily in my ruck division, but it's as good a spot as any.
I think it's best in the ruck because, in all likelihood, most other teams won't have great coverage, and it's only one position that needs to be covered. It's one person's chance of a late out, versus in another line where you have, 6 or 8 players. I think I'm also against starting a red dot, or at least trading one in at this stage of the season. But if your team already has one and you're not wasting a trade to bring in one, I think it's fine. If you already have Usher, and I think you maybe say you have one other prime fix-up you need to do, then I think it's more than okay to trade up to Janšek. But otherwise, I think you're happy to hold. You take the advantage of the red dot for 8 weeks, and you got to move on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, the ruck lineup, but I think that's a good summation of where the decision making process has got to be at this round. I think jumping along to the forward line, there are a couple players that really excelled that I don't think we really need to talk about. So Amelia Yasir was fantastic. Keely Skepper was fantastic. Lauren Young was very, very solid. I think they're now already almost outside of the bounds of this rookie discussion that we've got here. So to jump down to, I suppose, a few cheaper rookies that might still be reachable if you do want to jump off someone into a forward line rookie, there's an interesting player here. North Melbourne continue to deliver forward line rookies for us year on year. And this year they've got one who is playing down back. Willow, did you see much of the game of Claire Marnie on the weekend?
I did, and they looked smooth in the way that every single North Melbourne player just seems to. They just are part of a team that works really, really well. And I think it's because they play for a team where they're afforded time and space so they can get the ball and run off half back and look good doing so, even if Liam's shaking his head and saying not so much. But yeah, I mean, it's probably not a player that I'd be hugely interested in targeting, but I think it's another good find for North Melbourne.
I think that looked great in the second half, particularly. I also was shaking my head just the fact that I have only just pulled up my phone and seen that as of 13 minutes ago, Claire Marnie had been nominated for Mark of the Week, alongside Georgia Davis, who we'd also just been talking about. I think that the issue here is the players that aren't currently named for North. So it's Emma Carney, Nicole Bresnahan, Sarah Wall, Tessa Boyd, and to some degree as well, the double hyphen, Chrissy Lee Weston Turner, all 5 of whom are defenders who I suspect will be in the side within 2 to 3 weeks. Claire Marnie looked solid, but I'll also say didn't really have much of an opponent to speak of. A lot of her scoring came once the forward line at Geelong was weakened because Aisling Maloney got thrown on a wing in the fourth quarter. So, and it's the kind of game had died down. There was a bit of chipping going around. But I still think looked very good. But I would say that if you were going to target someone, Yasir at 434k, Young at 438k, Skepper at 465k are all higher priorities in my mind than Marnie.
I would definitely not. I think all of those 3 players are higher priority if you can reach them, for sure. But, I mean, just to provide a quick counter here, Liam, you're saying it was a chippy at the end of a North game. Is that not going to happen every single week in every single fourth quarter?
It didn't last year. It might feel like it right now. They've just got 100 points. And to be honest, they really did kind of play with their food in like the last 7 or 8 minutes. They really could have gone for the highest ever AFLW score again. But I just don't think it's reasonable to expect it to happen. And they were definitely advantaged by playing in some perfect conditions in a bigger ground at Marvel Stadium. I think that was perfect for someone like Marnie late in a game that they're up big. I definitely think North will be impressed. I won't be shocked if it's a bit of a rest in 2 to 3 weeks. I don't know if I'm prioritizing my rookie targets. I'm not prioritizing Marnie because of the team she plays in and because of the names still to come back that weren't not there because they were dropped, but not there because they are injured and targeting coming back relatively soon. And then you add in all the other players who weren't even named, I suspect, that will want to be getting a game this year at North.
Yeah. Well, let's flip around then to the other side of the discussion, because I think there's a few forward rookies that did not fire that started with a bit of money in their head. I'm talking, of course, about Ella Slocum and Imogen Trengove, who put up a 43 and 38 respectively. I mean, I personally was pretty disappointed by these scores. You know, I think particularly Slocum, I thought, you know, with the amount of ball that was out there to be won in that game, I was a bit surprised that wasn't, you know, kind of a 55 to 60 sort of score. Are these the sort of players that we should be looking to move on to the Sears and the Youngs and the Skeppers of the world?
Yes.
Yeah. I think the problem here is on every single line we've named a player that if you can move them on, you probably could. But if that's the case, you've got 5 or 6 players to move on, so you're going to have to prioritize. I think after what we saw in the preseason, Trengove, I think, will be a very, very good player in time, but probably the role's not quite there. I think that it probably was a bold call to start with Trengove regardless, just being that bit more expensive to begin with. Slocum, I think that it looked like a great option. Unfortunately, it didn't quite come to pass, but West Coast was a bit of a weird one this weekend, as we said. I'm not sure Slocum's necessarily a immediate priority compared to some of the others, but if they don't score well this week against Gold Coast, that would be quite a worry. But they do have enough money on them already that it's not a huge jump to someone like a Yasir.
That's kind of the challenge after the first round. Unless you've started with a bunch of cash in the bank, sometimes it's difficult to make those changes. So, yeah, I think that's something that I'm definitely considering this week. Liam, currently there's a few most traded in rookies that we've been looking at for trades. Do you want to run us through who they are?
Yes. So Ava Usher is first. Then it's Imogen Brown, Claire Marnie, Geordie Allen, and Yasmin Janček. So that I've not included Violet Patterson from that because she's now well outside the price bracket, and we haven't got Yasir and Skepper, etc. in there, even though they all started at or close to rookie price. I personally think I would be targeting, I think I've got Ava Usher at 1. I've got Geordie Allen at 2. I've got Janček at 3. I've then got Brown, and then I've got Marnie.
Yeah.
In terms of
these are probably the
those
more affordable
5
of the rookie options that we've got here. Under 400k is what we're talking.
Yeah, under 400k is what we're talking about here. That's of those top 5. That's how I'm ordering them.
Yeah. Great. All right. I think that's a good look at the rookies. We're going to jump across to our next hot topic now, which is probably the big one for round 1. It's believe it or not, because this is always the stress every season. Do we trust some of the scores that we're seeing? Because year on year, we get these first round scores where someone will put up a 90 and we should absolutely ignore it because they're not going to do it again for the rest of the season. But on the other hand, someone will put up a 90, we'll go, no, they're not going to do that again. And then they do it week on week on week. So I think we've got to go through some of these pop scores that we saw across the weekend and just say whether or not we trust it. So I'm going to go first in defense. The player that I'm looking at is Jenna Richardson, who is a Hawthorn defender that went bang with a 94 this week. One of the more impressive second quarters that I've seen from her. She was an absolute wall in defense, taking plenty of intercept marks against the Demons. In a Hawks backline where I think there is a lot of opportunity for a distributor role, we've talked about, Laura Elliott and Lavinia Cox and others over the preseason quite a bit. Jenna Richardson really took that role as the primary distributor there. The one hesitation that I would have is that there were a lot of intercept possessions in this game. We've seen her have these pop games before, and generally what happens is opposition teams do their absolute best to shut down the Hawks switching. Because when the Hawks were able to do that, and Jenna Richardson was being used as a pivot, I really think that we were looking very, very dangerous, and that was sort of when the comeback against the D's was on. So I think this is a great score, but I do think it's probably on the higher risk side for someone who's at 659k.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think like the thing for me with Richardson is, yes, the risk is there. The price is the tempter. It's clearly a much cheaper premium option compared to some of the other ones that we've looked at, but I can't imagine it being a 94 every week. And as you say, it's highly likely that there'll be some floor scores in there. So I'm probably not looking to bring in Jenna Richardson at this stage.
I think that there's also a case to be made that with St Kilda coming up this next week. Oh, sorry, not St Kilda. I'm thinking about my next point, which is if you're looking at Hawthorn, Port Adelaide and Collingwood as their next two matchups, I don't think it's going to be as good. I think what we saw from Melbourne was a distinct lack of small pressure forwards cutting down space, whereas you look at what gets rolled out for Port Adelaide. They even brought in Emily Elkington specifically to play as a pressure role. I think that Jenna Richardson is liable to have a 40 in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, very, very much up and down. Willow, how about yourself? Who's a player that you saw pop this weekend that you think is worth needing discussion?
I think if we just... Are we sticking with the defensive line?
Sticking with the defensive line. Sticking with the defensive line.
Yeah, sticking with the defensive line. We've talked a bit about some of the rookie defenders. So Patterson, Wakfa, how those two go, I think will be an interesting one. But for me, the one I do want to talk about is Becky Webster. Obviously very happy with it. I think it'll be quite interesting to see how that one plays out. Because while I think a 93 was exceptionally great, I can't imagine she's going to average 93. I think that would be remarkable. I guess the question here is whether this is a player who can push that 75, 80 like some of the top ones, or is it going to regress back to the norm of that sort of mid-60s?
I think it would be a risk to target Webster. I think we saw North have typically been a good defensive matchup, but also Webster is playing up as a role closer to stoppage from halfback, and often that will take place kind of in the defensive side of the wing in the centre square. That's where the ball lived for 3.5 quarters against North Melbourne. Really spoke to why she was able to amass so much of the ball, aided by the fact as well that a lot of hand passes very clean in those perfect conditions at Marvel. They're going to be overreaction to bring her in, given St Kilda, Gold Coast and Essendon up next for the next 3 games. I would be surprised if we saw nearly as much ball kind of behind the centre circle for Geelong. And I think as well, it was very quiet games from McDonald, from Morrison, from Bowen, and from mainly Georgie Prasparkas. It was a down game from the 3 main scorers. It's a surprise. I would be gobsmacked if Webster was the highest scorer of those 5 players. And so as a result, I wouldn't be trusting it.
Yeah, I'm certainly curious because I think we talked a little bit, Willow, about how Webster last year, the role hasn't changed massively, but with Mick Stanier as coach, the way that he's used Maeve Chaplin in the past is something that I find very interesting. I don't think I'm jumping on this week, but it's something that I'm definitely keeping tabs on in the next couple, because if that role holds against something that's not North Melbourne, and the scores kind of continue, then I'll be interested, but definitely not in the short term is what I'm thinking. I'll let you enjoy that ride yourself.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where picking that one to start with at a low price, I think is going to make it worth it for me and for coaches who have picked Becky Webster, because you're going to get that price increase. And then as soon as that scoring does drop off, if it does drop off, you can pretty quickly just bank the money, move sideways to whoever takes your fancy. As you say, I'm not sure it's a player I'd necessarily be targeting, especially after the price jump this week.
Yeah. Liam, how about yourself? Who's a defender that you think has got a score worth discussing?
Yeah, so score worth discussing for me, and it's just worth discussing. Let's look at the score. It's Charlie Thomas, right? Outperformed her priced out, outperformed her average last year, but did not do it how we expected it to happen. So we'd seen a near full-time inside midfield role, in the practice match. We'd heard a lot of talk about inside midfield time from Daisy Pearce. And then there was not a second inside during the game. It was a lot of really iffy areas off halfback until the fourth quarter, when it was push up higher, start quarters running off the half forward line, take marks, kick goals, and did get it done score-wise. Scored whatever it was, 85. But I was not ecstatic with what I saw quarter by quarter. And I think the problem that we got here is that we obviously knew that there were players missing from the inside midfield group in the practice match. No Lucia Painter, no Bella Lewis. Now, Lucia Painter was a near full-time inside mid. And the other thing that changed since the practice match is Jess Wrench out, long-term injury, which means that there was a need for another body off halfback. I think that given she got to an 85, so we don't have to worry about the price dropping. If you'd asked me at halftime, I would have said Charlie Thomas is going to be one of my most important trade-outs this week. The fact she's not going to drop like a stone in coin gives me a little bit of hope to hold. But I don't believe we're going to get the role that we want unless something drastic changes. Now, hopefully, a loss to GWS constitutes something drastic or a catalyst for something drastic, and Thomas gets a better role. But it was not a positive.
Yeah, no, very, very disappointing, because the prospect of Thomas going inside midfielder was very exciting. But yeah, hopefully that one we can sort of leave for a while we deal with bigger problems in our teams, but definitely something worth monitoring. There was another defender that was going inside as well this week, which actually came to fruition. One that really surprised me, Lucille Cronin, ended up having 75% midfield time for a pretty low score overall. It was just a mid-60s. Is that something that we're a little bit concerned about?
I'm not.
No? I thought it was interesting because they did lose the centre clearances 10-2. So that to me, against the Amelia Yassir and Sierra Greaves Monconti midfield, I'm curious.
Yeah, it worries me. I love Lucy Cronin as a player. I think they're going to be an absolute superstar of the competition, possibly as that midfielder. I'm not sure it's going to be this year. I think that they're going to score well without being super, I think is the thing. I think like that mid-60s average is probably about what I'd be expecting, and I'm not sure that's enough value for me.
I certainly don't think it's a problem if you've got her. I think you'd hold for a little bit longer. I think if you've not got her, I wouldn't be targeting her. It's something probably that will be interesting to see as it follows in the next couple of weeks, whether she holds that midfield time.
I think it's also just a case of I saw enough in terms of her ball use that I feel like is otherwise missing from this Collingwood midfield group to make me believe it's a long-term play. And I also think there's a case that Carly Ramos I don't think she's healthy, and I still don't think that a lot of the other more consistent inside midfielders for Collingwood are healthy. So that's why it is Cronin who's being prioritised at the moment.
Yeah. If I can actually get you to jump across, because that Collingwood midfield group is fascinating. Ramos had the incredibly low time on ground. We know that Breed Davies out. Matteo Breed played forward. It did leave a very different looking mix for them. And one player who scored pretty well was Ellie Runnels. What did you make of her game?
Everywhere. My God. Just particularly the first half, just racking up points like nobody's business. And it was killing me because I had Ellie Runnels in for a lot of the last week before lockouts, and I made the mistake of pivoting to Bell Doors. Not gonna hold on to that one. Like you said, definitely not the best midfield performance for the Pies, but I think Runnels looked good enough. I think it's going to come down to the what we see from the injury list from the Pies this week, who is returning, to get a sense of whether or not she's going to stay in there. But I think that she looked pretty spectacular.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to have Ellie Runnels in my side. Willow, is there a midfield score that you saw that you're somewhat interested in talking about here today?
Yeah, the one that fascinated me was Laura Gardner, the highest averaging player last year, most expensive player, dropped a big chunk of money from just a 90. One of the things we did talk about was how when Sophia Hurley's in the team, Laura Gardner doesn't necessarily score as well. Is this a concern with Sophia Hurley being fit? Is this one where if you do have Laura Gardner, should you be trading her down to get yourself a bit of extra money?
I can speak a little bit to the first part. I don't think it was a Sophia Hurley problem. It was a time on ground issue for Laura Gardner. Did not start. It started on the bench for at least the first 2 quarters, if not the first 3. Then finally started to get a little bit more. I think she started on the ground in the 4th, which was definitely able to kind of help her scoring. Had a 35-point last quarter after having had, nothing above 25 in the first 3. In terms of whether or not you want to trade her out, okay, let's put it out there. Like Abby Mackay, Ash Woodland, Abby Dowrick, Gabby Newton. If you're going to trade out Laura Gardner, trading down to one of those options, I think it's a solid enough play to generate the cash. If you are otherwise lacking options to generate cash to bring in Patterson, Usher, Geordie Allen, Janček, etc. Is it a priority option for me? No, because I think that this is a game where you have to just acknowledge that you're trying to bring in the top 4 or 5 scoring midfielders, and then everything else can happen a bit after. The point you've started Gardner, you've already lost a bit of the cash. I think it's okay to hold.
I think she's already lost, 113K this week?
Mm-hmm. Beaten by Ella Roberts. So disappointing.
Which is probably where we need to go next. This is the question. It's outrageous that we've gotten to the 50th minute of this recording and we haven't really talked about, do we trade Ella Roberts? That's my biggest question of the week.
Yeah, for me, my answer is yes. And I think it's one of those things where there are a lot of people that would probably say this is a bit reactionary, because I think a very hard tag is clearly the reason why this 53 has happened. I think the problem for me is it just is going to greatly affect the way that Roberts' price is. And I think if you jump off now, unless she scores a massive score next round, which it's Ella Roberts, she certainly could, I think there's more money to lose and is probably going to be someone that we can target a bit later in the season as a bit underpriced would be the way I'd look at it. And I'm probably going to use it as a way to get a bit of extra money myself.
Here's the counterpoint, which is the fact that you already admit that Ella Roberts is going to be a target, a little bit underpriced, is part of the reason that you probably should continue to hold. It's not a role change. I fully expect Ella Roberts to come out trying to kill half of the opposition team this week, because she was furious with the treatment she was getting, arguably a fair bit of it outside the bounds of the AFL rules, playing against GWS. The fact that she immediately becomes a target for so many other people, I think you put your team backwards by trading her out when you know that in all likelihood she will be a target in 2 to 4 weeks to trade back in.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid take, actually. Like, for me, the reason I'm doing it is because I think I can get more money to fix up other areas elsewhere, and then maybe when she is that lower price, I can trade up one of my rookies. But I think there's a great argument that you've just made for keeping her, because I think that she is a superstar, and I think that if you just keep her, you'll probably still have her at the end of the year. I think that's also a really valid play. It's part of the reason why, as you say, it's a really interesting one to see how people go about this situation.
My main concern with keeping Ella Roberts is that she's been susceptible to a tag and it's worked. The Giants have won the game, and I think won that battle pretty handily. I think in every game that the Eagles won last year, Ella Roberts was arguably best on ground in all of them. So that would be my biggest concern, is that the way to stop the Eagles is to stop Ella Roberts. And I appreciate that teams have tried to stop her in the past, but this one worked really well.
Yeah, it did. But, like, I don't think everyone has Grace Koch, who is like 170 centimeters, but was considered athletic enough to play in the ruck. And I actually think that there is a value in having nothing else to do on the ground. Like, Grace Koch does not have, I've played junior football my entire life, instincts. I know where I'm meant to be, and it annoys me that I just have to follow Ella Roberts around. Nothing else. No other footballing instincts are up there. It's just like, just stay with Roberts. And as I said, I truly believe that the umpiring and the fact that no holds were called on Koch for what you're doing with Roberts early, but very difficult to call it later in the game. And I think it meant that got to the fourth quarter, I reckon Roberts was tunnelled or had arms chopped on at least 3 or 4 marking contests. I don't think that that's happening again.
Yeah.
I just want to say how wild it is that we have just heard Liam utter the sentence, I don't think other teams have a Grace Koch.
If you had asked me to come up with 1,000 things that have never been said before that I will potentially utter this season, there is 0 chance that would have been on the list.
It's certainly a unique situation. Let's move on to some other teams because we've got a fair bit to go still. Some of the Carlton midfielders I thought were very impressive. Abby Mackay and Claudia Whitford putting up both scores over 100. They did lose the midfield battle, and we've got some midfielders to return. Would either of you have any interest in trading them in?
I am looking to trade in Claudia Whitford just because of the money that I think she'll be able to make. I have always been a big Claudia Whitford fan, and I should have backed her in to start the year, much to my detriment. Abby Mackay is a fascinating one for me. 119, looked amazing, but St Kilda really do give me the vibes that they're going to be a team that midfielders do well against pretty much every week. And that's why I probably wouldn't be initially targeting Abby Mackay. I think if we see 2-3 weeks of it, I mean, it might be too late by that point, but I think that that's sort of the idea of a player that you might target. I think, Jono, I'm surprised you haven't been targeting Abby Mackay to begin with straight away, always been one of your favourites. But for me, Whitford still at least has enough value to make that even if she doesn't continue to score hundreds, as long as she doesn't completely tank her scores, you'll get enough money. And then maybe you can go back to Ella Roberts, who knows. But yeah, I think that there's a bit more merit in going for Claudia Whitford, I would have thought.
No, fair enough. Moving along to the ruck lineups, we've debated all preseason whether it's going to be Matilda Schultz, whether it's going to be Mim Strom, or whether it's going to be Lucy Wales. Lucy Wales basically rucked, not unopposed because the Melbourne backups are fairly capable, but I think against an opponent that would not have prepared for her or have been ready for the trick she can pull out. But she did outscore the others by at least 20 points. What do you think we've learned from the first week? Is there any standout candidate you'd be trading in this week if you had gone with a rookie ruck on field, decided to restructure, and you wanted to grab one of the big dogs?
Yeah, I think if you've got one of them, I don't think there's any reason to panic. I think Schultz and Strom basically cancel each other out and both still scored okay. Wales scored really, really well against, as you say, very little opposition. I think that premium rucks probably are a long way down the priority order at this stage.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I think moving on to the forward line, there's probably 3 players here that I'm looking at as pretty important discussion points because they're all fairly below, I think, what people expected of them. That would be Michaela Bowen. There we go. I'm tracking what tonight. Tia Charlton, who had a 42, and Elaine Grigg with a 30. I think coaches would be pretty disappointed. Michaela Bowen, I think you would say that a 72 is, not that far below the standard score, but I think given the expectations you set in preseason, you'd probably be a little bit lower. Would you be trading out these players?
Okay, let's talk about Michaela Bowen, who had the most gut-wrenching roller coaster imaginable. Started the game on the bench and scored only 14 points in the first quarter, gave away 2 free kicks for head-high contacts, trying to lay a tackle. Had a 12 in the second quarter. Again, roll not very good. Had 3 one-kick in the third quarter. So score is like, wow, I'm losing 150k here on Michaela Bowen. Like, this was the worst possible option. Should have gone Bonnie Too Good. Should have gone anyone else. Then has 43 points in the last. Plays the entire game on the ground. Instead of starting on the bench going into the midfield, starts at half forward. Then goes into the midfield. 9 disposals, 3 marks, and 2 tackles. And looked spectacular. The reason why you got to talk about her is that she still lost cash, obviously. Again, we talk about the fact you're not going to play North Melbourne every week. It was always going to be one of the toughest matchups. It's just a hope that the role that we saw in the fourth quarter, I don't even think the scoring is going to be the same. I just need to see the role. I need to see Note start on the bench. I want to see half forward into midfield. If that can hold, it's worth holding. But if you can trade down and pick up 200k and still get a premium, that might be the downgrade that kind of frees up everything for you. So if you don't have Havana Harris, who scored more than Michaela Bowen in a horrific conditions, you're making over 200k. You're making 220k there. That can finance 2 rookie upgrades. I'm not opposed to doing it because of how bad that role was. It's just a case of, is it going to hold? And I don't know. I don't know if McStenier liked what he saw in the last quarter. It would be tough to like what he saw in the first 3 quarters from Bowen because she did nothing.
Yeah, I do think that role is one which I think it needs to be tested against a non-North Melbourne side because, even against Brisbane, Bowen was excellent in that practice game. And we talked about how midfielders might be good against St Kilda this year. That is Geelong's opponent this coming weekend. So I think probably worth a second chance is my read.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say. I think this week is going to be a real test. If Bowen can't score against a team that has been incredibly easy to score against for those midfielder types, I think that's where I would probably look to trade away for the money. But for now, I think it's a hold.
Yeah, I agree. If you'd asked me at 3/4 time, she was the easiest trade out of all time.
It's a good thing that the fourth quarter exists. And, glad she had it. But look, there were a couple last quarters that didn't save players. Tia Charlton and Elaine Grigg. Tia Charlton is one that I think we were all pretty keen to push this preseason, ended with the 42. But Liam, I think you were saying earlier that there was maybe a fair excuse here.
Yeah, it was. What was surprising was a particularly long bench stint to end the first quarter. After starting relatively slowly and then comes back on and has in the second quarter another relatively long bench stint to end the quarter. And then I started to notice what looked like a big bit of strapping on her quad, making me think that she's copped a corky at some point. She still had 75% CBAs, but I do think part of that was at what point in the game she was coming off the ground. The role was fine. It was there. She was, third in line for inside midfield scoring behind Marinoff and Goodwin. It's a question now of can we justify, she lost cash, which is surprising given she was already very cheap to begin with to start the year, but projected with a break even of 64. I think we'd all sit here and say that it's possible for her to score that, but I think of all of the options that we've talked about trading out that are relatively highly owned, who underperformed expectations, I feel like this is one that is less likely to burn you, particularly if there is a bit of an injury concern, a bit of a cork that may have limited her.
Yeah.
Alternatively, is that a reason to trade out if we're worried that that's going to hinder her scoring for future games?
More a case of you can make the cash down to, let's say you didn't start Amelia Yasir. You make the 115k by trading down to Yasir. And that's your avenue on the basis that it's unlikely to burn you, is my thinking.
I gotta say, that's a wonderful plan and definitely something that is currently sitting in my trades. I like that.
There you go.
Yep, there we go. I would definitely be trading out Elaine Grigg. Not a single CBA after that promised role in the preseason, which is rather sad. But unfortunately, that is sort of the swings and roundabouts when trying to figure out what team's going to line up with. I think we saw enough from Elaine Grigg last season to suggest that she is not a scorer when playing in the forward line. So I would probably be making that a priority trade out and jumping on whichever one of Yassir, Young, Skepper, and any of these sort of mid-price forwards that you have. Is there anyone in the forward line that had a pop score that you think is worth jumping on?
Not necessarily. I think the ones that did have pop scores are players like Keely Skepper and Amelia Yassir that we've talked a bit about already as value options. So similar to what we were saying about Charlton, if you don't have those players, maybe it's a good idea to jump aboard from one of those players like Grigg or Charlton to pick those up. But I don't think there's anyone necessarily that jumps out in terms of, someone I would definitely say needs to come in for me.
Well, Havana Harris, as a non-starter, feels like someone to target this week. Scored an 86 playing on Kaylee Kimber, but this will now go into a game against West Coast, who just allowed Tani Evans to score 90.
And I got to say, as someone who started with Havana Harris and was very, very keen on starting Havana Harris, I didn't consider that a pop score. I thought that was just a standard score for Havana Harris.
Oh, no. Like, I overcorrected, right? I'd had Harris in. I was concerned by how inexperienced the forward line was for Gold Coast and what that might mean for their ball movement. As it turns out, didn't matter. The ball went near Havana Harris, she scored. It was infuriating, ridiculous even, to watch. It could have been worse if she could have kicked straight. I'll chalk that up as a mistake and look to correct it. But in terms of like pop scores, an 86 is objectively a pop score for her, given I don't think she'd done higher than that outside of like one game last year.
I think there's a couple players, I suppose, that were under 600k that we probably are worth just throwing a quick throw at the stumps on. We've got Lila Keck, who put up an 86, Maggie Marnie, who put up an 80, and then Hayley McLaughlin, who is under 500k and put up a 75. Are any of those players people that interest you?
I think for me, looking at those cheaper options is probably more the priority for me rather than going sideways on some of these other ones.
Yeah.
If they're players that aren't pop scores, if they stick as options, if they do continue to score well, I think maybe they're players that you might look at in 2-3 weeks once things have settled a bit. But for now, I'm probably not looking to do a whole lot of sideways work.
I'd say that of that list, it's Maggie Marnie who most surprised me. Looking like instead of playing as a small forward inside forward 50, playing a high half forward role. There's a couple of times where I genuinely thought I was watching Tyler Hanks because they looked like they were quite similar at stoppage. Not something I'm going to launch into straight away, but a name I'm going to watch. A couple of names that are slightly cheaper than I think worthwhile mentioning, both from Richmond. Montana Beraldson scored a 68 playing off halfback this year. It's a solid score. I want to watch it again. I'm not going to launch into it straight away, but 405k, worthwhile keeping a name on. If she scores a 50 odd this week, she ends up still below 500k, but a name worthwhile watching. And then Sierra Greaves, who was the rising star this week, only scored 67. I think the things to be watching out for there is had 24 disposals for that 67, and I think got the second most coaches votes for Richmond and third most for that game. So clearly the coaches were impressed by what Greaves had done. I wonder if I hold out some concerns for the quality of her kicking, but her stoppage work was solid and is a name that I regret not starting. And, if maybe I'd had a few more rookies hit, she'd be a target for me. It's a name that I'm going to continue to watch. If that midfield role is going to stay there at the exclusion of someone like Dana East and Ali Dalloway, I think it's a worthwhile target as well.
Yeah, and I will say Sierra Greaves, I was really impressed with how she played, but she does give me sort of early career Moncon vibes where very, very good at getting the ball, but didn't do a huge amount otherwise not many marks and tackles, which is why they only did score that 67. So I'm not sure this season necessarily there might be huge ceiling scores, but I think that, if you've got her, I don't think there's any worry. I don't think you need to be trading her out.
Yeah. Let's jump forward into a couple questions that have been asked by listeners. The first one by Damo Dogs: is McDonough the next coming of Bonnie Toogood? I'm very glad you've answered this question, asked this question, because yes, Anya McDonough is fantastic. I don't think she's going to be the forward marking target. I think she's more just going to be freed up by Jackie DePie, who has played an excellent forward role. Her intercept, her big aerial presence, I think really created a lot of opportunities, because then it allowed McDonough to sort of get out the back with some pace and use sort of her athletic traits. So I'm pretty excited by McDonough's ability to beat what she put up last season, which is, I suppose, a big call given how impressive she was last year. Willow, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, to your point, I think that maybe not from necessarily a fantasy perspective, but from a role perspective, I think you've sort of mentioned Jack DePie is probably the second coming of Bonnie Toogood, just the way they go around the field and just sort of mark everywhere. But I think that Toogood's a special player and will probably outscore both of those two. But I think McDonough is a really, really interesting option for fantasy, and getting up and down the ground is always a good thing, I suppose. Well, not always, but is often a good thing for players to get more involved in the game. And McDonough could be a player that if you do have the luxury of wanting to do sideways trades in your premium forward line, maybe it's one that could get you ahead.
Yeah. Liam, I'm going to throw this next one to you. Chris has asked, is Laura Elliott a trade immediately?
Yes, comfortably. There was a lot of points to be had in that Hawthorn defence, and even though Laura Elliott took some kick-ins...
We should probably clarify that this is trade out.
Yes, trade out. This is a trade out. I'm not trading in a 346k defender who scored 26. This is a trade out. Yes, absolutely. In terms of so for reference, I put out a poll on Twitter, or I put out a post on Twitter asking for some questions. I feel like we have covered a lot of them. A lot of Ella Roberts questions, a lot of Skepper, a lot of Young, a lot of Usher. There was a few questions about maybe some underperforming Ellie Blackburns and Anne Hatchards. I think personally they were a hold. These are just some of the kind of questions that we couldn't I didn't feel like we fit in elsewhere.
Yeah, fair enough. Which there's another question here. I don't see who it's by, but
this is from Andrew. Ando6767 Andrew.
Yes, and they asked Usher or Patterson as the bigger trade target this week.
It's probably the biggest question of the week that we kind of didn't answer because Patterson is both a rookie and not a rookie at the same time.
Yeah. Well, let's try and just keep this short and succinct then. I just want, who are you picking? You specifically.
Usher.
And for me, Patterson, and it's entirely to do with how I've structured my team, which is having the extra defensive rookie on field. So for me, I want the defensive rookie who's going to score better. And for me, that's why that's the priority. But I think if you're just choosing between the two, if it's for your bench, go Usher.
Yeah. I'm probably leaning towards Usher as the bigger target, but at the same time, Patterson is the player I'm more likely to trade in given my preference to trade out defenders. So that's probably where I'm sitting at. Liam, why don't you take us through the captain's corner for the week ahead? Who are the captains we're targeting?
I think it's comfortably Ebony Marinoff number one, given the stoppage scoring that Carlton allowed against St Kilda. And then the big question here this week is, do we see still elite scores from North Melbourne's midfield because they are playing against Brisbane? I still think that Jasmine Garner, just with the way that she's going to dominate, I still think that she's second. And then it's a question of Riddell versus a potentially rejuvenated but TBC Laura Gardner, who's playing against Essendon, who I feel like will allow some big scores this year. I still think it's Riddell. Then I think we kind of glossed over it. For 3.5 quarters, Gara Bowers looked like she was back, particularly in the first half. She looked elite, if a level below those other four. I almost feel like she is more likely to score above Gardner this week, though.
Yeah, if it wasn't for that final quarter of 8, I think she was absolutely dominating that match. So I'd very much trust that scoring. Very, very handy. All right, let's talk. We're rounding out a very long episode here. Trade plans going forward. Willow, why don't you get us kicked off?
Yeah, sort of mentioned it across the episode, but my trade plans are basically getting in players I probably should have started with and basically trying to generate a little bit of money from the players that didn't do so well this week. So currently as it sits, I'm trading out Ella Roberts. I'm going to trade out Tia Charlton. And I'm also going to trade out Lily Quigley just because I have the money to do so in order to get Claudia Whitford, Amelia Yasia, and Violet Patterson.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I'm actually thinking quite similarly. I'm looking at Violet Patterson and Amelia Yasia. I'm going to be trading out Ella Slocum just because I think on field, I suppose she was probably the only player that really underperformed. I think everyone kind of did what I expected, and that's why I had a very good round. But I think I've decided I probably need to expect a little bit more of my players. So Chantel Emonson is one that I might be moving on as well just to get that cash out of Patterson. And then my final trade, I'm a little unsure at the moment. I'm either going to be trading out Quigley as a bottom rookie score, or I'll be moving on Tia Charlton. Just depends who I can afford as that sort of mid-priced forward. Liam, who are you looking to trade this week?
Oh, I've really struggled with identifying the kind of best trade structure because I see getting out of Lily Quigley is quite important, but obviously it becomes very difficult given she's at 200k. So it may ultimately be I'll look to trade kind of downgrade Charlton to Usher because I had already had Skepper on field, brings Yasia on field for me. Then possibly look at upgrading Georgie Davis to Yasmin Janček. But to be perfectly honest with you, I think that it's going to be a case of trying to find a way to bring in Usher, trying to find a way to bring in Patterson. And then my main unique, I won't bore everyone on the podcast because not many people did it, is do I hold on to Isabel Dawes? She scored 120-something against North Melbourne in the grand final last year. I think the big problem on the weekend was there was not many tackles to be laid by Brisbane because Essendon weren't really accumulating the ball inside. I wonder if that's a different kettle of fish against North. But it's if I don't trade her out this week, she's going to be very cheap. But she's going to have lost a lot of cash, and it's going to be very difficult to find a good trade. So yeah, I'm at a loss this week. We will do an on-air, most likely again on Friday this week, and I'll give you guys a much more concrete update. But yeah, it's a tough one.
Definitely some big decisions there. That is going to do us for this week's episode. So glad. Thanks for listening in. Just to wrap up, as always, you can always find us wherever you get your podcasts on Free Kick or the official AFLW Fantasy podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram as well, or X. I suppose not so much Twitter these days. Follow our Substack as well, where now that the preseason's over, we may be posting there a little bit less frequently, but we're definitely keen to try and get some more in-season content going. So if you've got any ideas, shout out things that you might want to see. And join the Free Kick League. I think it's good with a good start with the 21 coaches in there so far, but yeah, it would be good to see that grow as the season goes on. So join in. The code is in the description.
Or if you are very good at just immediately hearing and writing it down, it's RSG4QUJL. Very easy, very catchy.
Yeah. I'll never forget that. What an easy to remember code. That definitely, I remember, starts with R. I don't know. Listen. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
See ya.